We fired upon their sky with the certainty of gods. The Terran moon, once a pale sentinel above their oceans, broke apart under our weapons' breath. The detonation spread like a silent scream across the void, light blooming brighter than their sun for a fleeting instant. Fragments scattered in every direction. An avalanche of stone and dust cast adrift, spiraling into unstable orbits. For worlds we had conquered before, such a blow meant inevitable collapse. The tides would rage, the seasons would shatter. Civilizations would choke in the storms of their own world's undoing. We waited. We watched. We believed their extinction assured. At first, all unfolded as predicted. Earth's seas convulsed, rising in walls of water that swallowed coasts and cities whole. The atmosphere howled with storms vast enough to tear continents. Tectonic plates, once lulled by the moon's steady pull, now clashed in violent upheaval. We measured the casualties from orbit with cold precision, millions erased within hours. Humanity should have broken then, fractured into chaos, torn apart by hunger, fear, and grief. Yet something stirred beneath their dying skies that we had not anticipated. We saw them gather. Across crumbling cities and flooded plains, they emerged from the wreckage not as scattered prey, but as a people bound together by loss. Fires burned, but within those fires we glimpsed order rising from despair. Where other species crumbled, they endured. Where others fell silent, they shouted defiance into the storm. Their grief was not a void, but a pulse. It rippled through the ether, resonating so fiercely that even our minds, trained to silence all foreign noise, could feel its weight. It was grief made into a weapon. We had catalogued hundreds of species. We had witnessed rebellion, despair, and surrender. But this vibration of sorrow interwoven with fury, it was something we could not classify. Across subspace, the signal of their anguish pressed against us like a storm tide. My kin whispered in the silence of our vessel. "Do you feel it?" Yes, we all felt it. We told ourselves it was the last echo of a dying species. That soon their voices would be silenced, their sorrow nothing but dust carried on cosmic winds. But I could not look away. The humans did not weep as others wept. They sharpened their mourning into resolve. I saw it in their eyes, captured by our probes as they gathered survivors from shattered coastlines, their faces lit by fire and lightning. They were not pleading for salvation. They were promising vengeance. Our commanders dismissed my warnings. They spoke of inevitability, of mathematics. They said no world had ever survived the loss of its moon, that the humans would follow the same path as the Jarthi, whose oceans boiled into extinction, or the Shal, who tore each other apart when their night sky changed. We had history on our side, and history favored annihilation, but history had never accounted for them. For 3 rotations we lingered in orbit, measuring their decline. Instead, we measured their rise. Their fractured governments, once at odds, now moved as one. Their armies, scattered and ill-equipped, now trained not in competition, but in unity. Even the smallest of their kin, children, took to the ruins to salvage, to rebuild, to fight for the survival of others. Every act of despair became an act of defiance. They carved shelters from collapsed structures. They lit the darkness with fire when the power grids failed. They bound their wounds with torn cloth when medicine ran dry. And all the while, they looked to the broken sky. It was then I understood. The moon had been a guardian, yes, but also a chain. Its destruction had not ended them. It had unbound them. We whispered among ourselves what no commander dared to speak aloud. Had we not ended a species, but awakened one? For in the void beyond our windows, humanity no longer seemed fragile. They no longer seemed like prey. They seemed like something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something inevitable. I recall the moment clearly. The moment fear entered even my mind. Our scanners detected fluctuations along the debris field. Human ships, small and battered, threading paths through chaos that should have torn them apart. They scavenged their own shattered moon, tearing life from ruin. I asked myself, who harvests their own grave to build a weapon? Who looks upon the ruin of their sky and sees only possibility? The answer chilled me. Only humanity. Our commanders spoke of patience, of waiting for the storms to finish what our weapons had begun. But patience began to feel like hesitation. Hesitation like doubt. Doubt like fear. Already I sensed the tide shifting, though no one would name it, for we had destroyed their moon, yes. But in doing so, we had forged their unity. And unity, I feared, was far more dangerous than any satellite of stone. The humans had lost their moon, but they had not lost their resolve. They had not lost themselves. And even then, though none of us dared to admit it, we could feel it. The beginning of something vast, something terrible, something that would not stop at their own survival. Something was coming. Cliffhanger transition. Our weapons had silenced their night sky, but their silence in return was not surrender. It was something else entirely. And soon, we would understand what we had truly awakened. We expected collapse. The Terran world had lost its stabilizing moon. Its oceans churned endlessly. Its skies screamed with storms that clawed at its continents. Such a world should have drowned in its own chaos. We orbited, watching, measuring, recording. Each hour that passed should have brought new extinction events, the unraveling of civilization, the fracturing of what little unity remained. But what we found was silence. It unnerved us. Humanity, once a species of noise and signal, of endless chatter across the void, had gone dark. Their transmissions ceased. No broadcasts of distress, no calls for aid, not even their crude entertainments, once beamed across their orbital stations in ceaseless streams, continued. The frequencies we had once mocked for their chaos became empty, static. At first, our commanders celebrated. They claimed silence as proof of collapse, a species so dependent on noise, now broken into muteness. But the silence did not sit as victory in my thoughts. It was not the silence of ruin. It was the silence of calculation. The Terrans had always been loud, too loud. They shouted into the stars before they had ships to carry them. They announced themselves when they should have hidden. They dared to speak when greater civilizations would have crushed them for the arrogance of their voice. And now, when their world trembled, they fell into a hush so complete that even the stars seemed quieter for it. We should have felt triumph. Instead, we felt unease. The orbital stations circling Terra were abandoned, their lights extinguished, their paths left drifting. We scanned them and found no life, only derelict husks. Yet even in abandonment, we sensed intention. Systems had been purged. Databases wiped clean. It was not neglect, but deliberate erasure. They had vanished their presence from orbit as though drawing breath before a strike. Our long-range sensors swept the asteroid belts beyond, and there, at the edges of shadow, we found whispers. Fragments of transmission, pulses encoded in patterns unlike any we had broken before. Our quantum deciphers unraveled nothing. The codes were layered, recursive, shifting in ways that no machine could predict. It was not the language of a desperate people. It was the language of predators preparing the hunt. Our commanders dismissed it as random noise, but I heard the cadence, the rhythm. It was communication, and for the first time I felt the unsettling truth. The silence was not surrender. It was cover. Humanity was moving unseen. We began to patrol the void with unease. Our fleets, once certain of dominance, tightened formations, their sensors fixed on every shadow. The asteroid belts became labyrinths of suspicion. We searched for ships that refused to be seen. We hunted for signals that darted like ghosts through the static. And all the while, the silence pressed on us. Have you ever known a silence that feels like breath on your neck? That was what it became. Each absence of sound was a presence. Each darkened station a watcher. Each flicker of debris across our scanners a blade in waiting. The humans had inverted the field of war. What they lacked in strength, they replaced with invisibility. Our fleet captains began to argue. Some claimed humanity had crippled itself, hiding in fear. Others whispered that they were waiting, sharpening something in the dark. But none could answer why the encrypted fragments continued, why they spread across belts and orbits as though mapping a web we could not see. Then came the first disappearance. A patrol vessel, small but swift, reported contact with drifting debris. Its last transmission was garbled static followed by silence. We found nothing but fragments. hull plating scarred with precision cuts, as though the void itself had dissected it. Our commanders spoke of accident, of collision with moon debris, but I had seen collisions. This was not one. Days later, a second vessel vanished. Then a third. Each disappearance closer to Terra, each marked by signals we could not decipher. Our formations grew tighter. Fear began to coil through our ranks. We were not the hunters. We were being hunted. It was then I understood the depth of their silence, for silence itself had become their weapon. Where we had once tracked them by their noise, their chaos, their recklessness, now we found nothing. No trail, no trace, only absence. And absence is the perfect camouflage. I recall staring through the viewport at their storm-racked world below. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating a planet scarred and broken, yet alive. I wondered, what manner of species adapts so quickly? What creature, brought to the brink of extinction, turns invisibility into strategy? We told ourselves they were weak, but the silence told us otherwise. One night cycle, as our ship drifted through the wreckage of their moon, I thought I heard it again, that pulse of grief I had felt before. But now it was changed. No longer raw anguish. It was shaped, sharpened. It was a rhythm, steady, patient, relentless. A heartbeat in the dark. It struck me then. Humanity was no longer merely surviving. They were stalking. Our commanders still spoke of patience, of inevitability. They still told themselves that storms and famine would claim the Terrans before we needed to lift another weapon. But we, those who watched the void, who listened to its silence, we knew the truth. The humans were not broken. They were preparing, and preparation meant war. Cliffhanger transition. When the third ship vanished, our commanders called it chance. But we who felt the silence knew better. The void was no longer ours. It belonged to them. We had thought their shattered moon would be a tomb. Its broken pieces drifted like a scar across their skies, a graveyard of stone circling their wounded world. To us it was victory incarnate, a constant reminder that Terra had been broken beyond repair. The dead do not build monuments. The dead do not rise from graves. The dead do not fight. But humans are not like the dead. At first, we observed only scavengers, small craft weaving between shards of lunar stone, their engines flickering with uneven light. We mocked them in our councils, desperate creatures stripping corpses for scraps. They moved with no symmetry, no order, and yet there was something deliberate in their chaos. They charted paths through fields that should have torn them apart, slingshotting between jagged masses that would have crushed more disciplined fleets. It was not salvage. It was creation. Weeks passed, then months. The drifting graveyard changed before our eyes. The fragments of their moon became scaffolds for steel. Where once floated ruin, there now grew shape. Hollowed stones gutted and refilled with metal, propulsion, and weaponry. The humans were building among the wreckage, stitching an armada from their celestial corpse. Cities that had fallen to ruin on Earth seemed reborn in orbit, not as sanctuaries, but as war machines. We should have struck then. We should have burned the graveyard before it became an arsenal. But arrogance stayed our hands. Our commanders dismissed their efforts as futility. What could primitives forge from stone and grief? What threat could scavengers pose to an empire that spanned stars? And so we watched, and waited, and doubted nothing, until the first strike. It came in silence. A patrol vessel, gliding through the debris field, was cut apart by nothing more than a rock. Not a rock drifting idly, but one hurled with speed so great our sensors barely registered its approach. A mass of stone, accelerated to a fraction of light itself, sliced through alloy plating thicker than mountains. Our crew whispered in disbelief. No empire had ever weaponized celestial fragments in such a way. To us, debris was nuisance, hazard, obstacle. To them it was ammunition. We thought it accident. An impossible convergence of mass and momentum. But then it happened again, and again. Patrol after patrol vanished in bursts of fire and silence, torn apart not by plasma, nor blade, nor beam, but by stone. Stone sharpened by human hands. Our fear deepened as we studied the wreckage. These were not random collisions. The trajectories were deliberate, precise. The debris was being guided, manipulated, hurled with intent. Their engineers had birthed machines among the ruins. Rail systems coiled around stone, magnetic slings that used the void itself as firing ground. What we had seen as tombstones, they had transformed into cannons. It was grotesque genius. I remember the first time we witnessed it directly. A battleship, vast and proud, moved to scatter their scavenger fleets. From the shadows of the graveyard came a flash. No plasma, no beam, no energy. Just motion. A rock, jagged and gray, screaming through the void. It struck the battleship amidships, carving through armor and atmosphere alike. The vessel split in two, venting fire and screams into silence. And from the hollowed craters of their moon, the humans emerged, engines burning cold blue. The dead had risen, and they bore weapons of grief. We studied their creations in horror. Entire fragments of the moon were being hollowed into mobile fortresses. The very stone that had once stabilized their tides now stabilized their war effort. Where we saw ruins, they saw resources. Where we saw a graveyard, they saw an armory. Their grief had become steel. We realized then that humans possessed a trait we had never cataloged. Not endurance alone, not violence alone. It was something far more dangerous, transmutation. They could turn anything into a weapon. Loss into unity, ruin into resource, grief into resolve. What empire can defeat a species that turns every wound into a blade? Our fleets began to suffer. Entire wings fell to their improvised weaponry. We sent destroyers to clear the debris fields, but they were swallowed by traps, stones tethered to magnetic lines, flung with merciless precision. Each strike was unpredictable, each kill a lesson learned and improved upon. They adapted faster than we could comprehend, and still, the silence remained. They did not broadcast their triumphs, did not scream their vengeance into the stars. They fought in shadows, their silence the roar of predators who knew they had become hunters. One evening cycle, I stood at the viewport and watched their graveyard shimmer with distant fire. For a moment, it looked as if their shattered moon had become alive again, its fragments pulsing with light, each heartbeat another strike against our fleets. I thought then, we are not witnessing desperation. We are witnessing birth, and I feared what was being born. The twist came when they unveiled their true design. The rocks were not only weapons hurled across Voide, they were ships in themselves. Fragments of stone, gutted and refilled with steel and fire, housing crews who lived among death to wield it as shield and blade alike. These were not vessels of empire, clean and ordered. These were monstrosities of survival, crude yet devastating. The kind of war machines only a people baptized in ruin could imagine. Our empire's doctrine had no defense for this. We fought with precision, with elegance, with predictability. The humans fought with chaos. They fought with desperation. They fought as though each strike carried the weight of extinction itself. And in truth, it did. Our commanders began to see the truth too late. Already patrol routes were abandoned, trade lines cut. Already our fleets traveled not as masters but as prey. Already the humans had turned their tomb into territory. They had turned death into dominion. I will never forget the silence in the command hall when the first report arrived. An entire dreadnought, one of our empire's greatest weapons, obliterated not by technology, but by a rain of stone hurled with impossible precision. A weapon born not of science, but of grief. And in that silence, I heard it again. That pulse I had felt before. That rhythm. That heartbeat in the void. It was louder now. Not only grief. Not only anger. It was war. Cliffhanger transition. We thought the shattered moon was a tomb. But it had become their forge. And from it, humanity was rising, not as survivors, but as predators. The next strike would not be against patrols. It would be against us all. We came with 1,000 ships. It was not arrogance. It was certainty. Our empire had raised worlds tenfold stronger with half that number. 1,000 warships in formation was not an army. It was inevitability. The High Command had grown weary of waiting for storms to finish the humans, weary of whispers about their scavenger fleets and their silence in the dark. And so they gave the order, end it. We descended upon Terra like a curtain of steel blotting out the stars. From orbit, The sight was magnificent. Rows upon rows of carriers, dreadnoughts, destroyers, each burning with the fire of engines that had carried us through centuries of conquest. In every battle before, the sight alone was enough to break resistance. Even the proudest of civilizations had bowed when faced with such overwhelming force. The humans did not bow. The first strike should have been theirs to endure. Instead, it was ours. Out of the graveyard of their shattered moon, their fleets erupted like swarms of insects, small craft darting among debris, weaving impossibly close to our formations. Their ships bore no symmetry, no discipline. They were asymmetrical monstrosities, half stone, half steel, their hulls jagged and crude. To our eyes, they were chaos given form. But chaos has teeth. Our dreadnoughts opened fire. Energy beams lanced across the void, tearing through the first wave with ease. Dozens of their craft disintegrated in seconds. Yet even as we celebrated, more came, filling the gaps like water through shattered walls. They moved unpredictably, scattering, converging, vanishing into the shadows of moon fragments only to emerge again with a strike we had not foreseen. For every 10 we destroyed, one of ours fell. At first, that seemed acceptable. Attrition was the way of empire. We could lose 100 ships for every 1,000 of theirs and still crush them beneath the inevitability of numbers. But then we began to notice the pattern, or rather, the lack of one. Our doctrine thrived on predictability, on exploiting repetition. Their strategies had no repetition. A frigate would hurl itself against a battleship, detonating its core in a blast that crippled 2 more of our vessels. A station we believed abandoned suddenly lit with power and exploded, scattering lethal shrapnel across entire wings of our formation. Our admirals called it wasteful, inefficient, barbaric. Yet every barbaric strike tore holes in the precision of our fleet. And into every hole, more humans poured. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for vengeance. I remember one moment with crystalline clarity. A swarm of their smallest craft latched onto the hull of a cruiser, clawing into its armor like insects. Before we could intervene, they ignited their reactors, sacrificing themselves in a chain of fire that split the cruiser apart. My kin recoiled in horror. What species destroys its own ships to destroy a single foe? But the humans did not see destruction. They saw exchange. And in exchanges, they were willing to pay any price. Our dreadnoughts pushed deeper, tightening the net around Terra. The planet below roared with storms, lightning flashing across oceans as though the world itself raged against us. And still the humans fought. Then came the moment we did not foresee. From the graveyard above Terra, stones moved. Not drifting, not tumbling, moving. Great fragments of their shattered moon, slung by magnetic rails and gravitic slings, hurled into our formations with speed that broke our sensors. A mass of stone the size of a mountain struck a carrier group, tearing through hulls as though they were parchment. Entire squadrons vanished in the silent blossom of fire. We had mocked their crude weapons. Now those weapons carved apart fleets. The chaos deepened. Where we tightened, they scattered. Where we scattered, they converged. Our admirals barked orders, their voices sharp with panic masked as discipline. But the humans had no admirals. Or perhaps they all were admirals. Their fleet fought with no center, no hierarchy we could discern. Every unit acted independently, yet somehow as one, guided by desperation, by fury, by the singular truth that survival required no symmetry, and it worked. I saw dreadnoughts fall not to coordinated barrages, but to madness. Ramming strikes, improvised mines, explosions timed not by logic but by instinct. Their losses were vast, hundreds, then thousands of their craft shattered in fire, but for each one lost, the price to us was greater. And the Void does not count numbers, it counts momentum. The momentum was theirs. At the height of the battle, when our fleets pressed hardest, believing victory still within reach, the humans unleashed their final horror. The graveyard above Terra cracked open like a hive. From its heart came a rain of stone, hundreds of fragments hurled at once, each guided with precision, each aimed with fury. The stars disappeared. All we could see was rock and fire, ships scattered, formations broke. Entire wings of our fleet were shredded as though the void itself had turned against us. And in that storm of death, human vessels darted between the fragments, weaving with impossible grace, striking from within their own apocalypse. We realized too late the truth. The humans were not defending Terra. They were not guarding a home. That battle was not about preservation. It was about punishment. Vengeance had become their doctrine. I remember watching as one of our dreadnoughts, the Vorthon's Glory, was impaled by a shard of stone hurled so fast it burned like a star. I remember the silence in the command hall as we realized what we faced. We had not come to extinguish a dying species. We had come to awaken predators. The battle raged for cycles. By the end, both sides bled. The debris field expanded, littered now not only with moon fragments, but with twisted wreckage of our empire's might. Thousands of their ships were gone. Hundreds of ours drifted in ruin. But though the humans had lost more, they had gained everything. For the first time in living memory, our empire had not won. We retreated under the veil of necessity, claiming strategy, claiming regrouping. But within our ranks we whispered the truth. We had not been repelled by strategy. We had been driven back by chaos. By a people who valued survival over victory, vengeance over order, resolve over reason. And as our fleet limped away from Terra's orbit, broken and bloodied, I looked back upon their world, shattered, storm-racked, scarred beyond recognition, yet still alive, still burning. And I knew the battle had not ended anything. It had only begun something far worse, something none of us could stop. Cliffhanger transition. We thought Terra would fall in silence. Instead, it rose in fire. And as our empire nursed its wounds, whispers spread across the stars. Whispers that humanity had shown the galaxy that even empires could bleed. We thought we had seen all that flesh could become. In our empire's long march across the stars, we had conquered silicon intelligences that calculated futures before they arrived. We had extinguished insectoid swarms that devoured planets to fuel their endless breeding. We had broken empires older than suns, civilizations that carved gods from plasma and worshipped themselves as eternity. None had endured against us. None had surprised us until the humans. We believed Terra's broken orbit was the climax of their struggle. What could remain after the shattering of a moon, after the storm of vengeance they hurled upon us? Surely they would collapse, consumed by the cost of their fury. Their fleets burned as brightly as ours. Their world bled oceans and storms. No species could endure such loss, and yet they did not collapse. They changed. At first we saw it only in whispers, in the survivors of their fleets, returning not broken but hardened. Ships that should have been silent graves emerged, rebuilt. Scarred hulls plated with new alloys scavenged from both their wreckage and ours. Even their dead became weapons, their remains guiding codes and patterns that baffled our engineers. But it was not merely their machines that transformed. It was them. Our telepaths, so long the certainty of our dominance, returned shaken. The human mind had always been strange to touch, filled with noise, sharp edges, endless collisions of thought. Primitive, we called it. Crude. A species drowning in its own chaos. Yet now that chaos had sharpened. Our telepaths described storms, vast, unending storms of thought that could not be charted or pierced. "It is not a mind," one whispered to me. "It is a battlefield." They began to resist intrusion, not with training, not with technology, but with raw instinct. One by one, our telepaths recoiled, bleeding from their eyes, their voices trembling with words they refused to repeat. For the first time, we could not read our prey. They had closed their minds. Or worse, they had weaponized them. On shattered Terra, their world of oceans and ruins, new structures rose. Not palaces, not monuments, forges, dockyards. Their planet became an engine. Cities that once glittered with commerce and art became hives of industry, pouring metal into orbit. They did not rebuild their moon. They turned its corpse into a crucible. Entire mountains hollowed into shipyards. Oceans dredged for fuel. The planet itself seemed to awaken, reshaped into a weapon of war. And yet, there was something more disturbing than their industry. They did not mourn as we understood mourning. Other species we had conquered bent beneath grief, their spirit broken, their will fragmented, but the humans fed upon it. Their grief did not drain them. It transformed them. Their songs, when intercepted, were not laments but oaths. Their broadcasts, though encrypted, pulsed with rhythm and defiance. We intercepted fragments of their art etched into hulls, images painted in blood and steel, not of despair but of wrath. Where others withered, they kindled, and in that kindling something ancient stirred. We discovered too late that the destruction of their moon had not ended their story. It had ignited it. Our scholars scoured their histories, desperate to understand what we faced. What they found chilled us more than their fleets. Again and again, across their brief existence, humanity had risen from cataclysm. Empires burned, yet they rebuilt. Plagues consumed, yet they endured. Entire continents drowned in war, yet they emerged sharper, more cunning, more relentless. To them, collapse was not an ending. It was a beginning. No machine, no empire, no ancient power had ever carried such a pattern. It was as though adversity was their element. Catastrophe their forge, loss their teacher, and now the galaxy itself was their crucible. We saw the change most clearly in their new fleets. Where once their vessels were crude amalgamations of stone and steel, now they bore an elegance that unsettled us. Not symmetry, never symmetry, but function perfected through failure. Each hull scar told a story. Each weapon was forged from lessons carved in fire. Our war scouts reported smaller ships outmaneuvering entire wings of ours, vanishing into asteroid fields only to strike from behind with uncanny precision. Their weapons grew stranger, rail slings hurling moon shards, fusion mines seeded in planetary rings, debris clouds sculpted into traps invisible to sensors. What species learns not just from its victories, but from its wounds? I remember the council session where one of our strategists, trembling, spoke aloud the words none dared voice. They are evolving, not across generations, not across eons, but now. Before our eyes. With every battle, with every loss, they adapted. Our weapons that once tore through their armor now faltered. Our strategies that once encircled them now unraveled. Even our language for war failed against them, for they fought in ways no doctrine could chart. It was as if the destruction of their moon had stripped them of illusion, and in that void, they discovered something we had long forgotten, what it meant to fight with nothing but will. We began to fear. Fear was not unknown to us. Empires do not rise without it. But always before, fear had been tempered by knowledge, that our fleets were stronger, our minds sharper, our destiny assured. Against humanity, fear felt different. It was the fear of not understanding. We had thought them fragile primitives clinging to a single world. Now, even as that world bled, they rose into something else, something larger. Something the galaxy had no word for. They were not merely surviving. They were becoming. There was one moment that crystallized this truth. A skirmish in a nameless system, far from Terra, where one of our patrol fleets encountered a remnant of their scavenger armada. Outnumbered 5-1, the humans should have fled. They did not. Instead, they lured our ships into the orbit of a barren world. At first, we mocked their desperation. What defense could stone and dust provide? Then the planet itself split apart. They had buried weapons beneath its crust, improvised charges fashioned from our own wreckage, enough to fracture an entire world. The explosion hurled fragments across orbit, a storm of stone and fire that tore our patrol apart. The human fleet vanished into the chaos, not a single vessel lost. We had thought their vengeance bound to Terra. We were wrong. They had carried it into the stars. Our empire gathered, deliberated, sought answers in archives older than their species. Some whispered that they had awoken not alone, that something deeper, older, stirred within them. That in their chaos lay a resonance with the void itself. We dismissed it as fear's poetry, but in silence we wondered, for what species defies death by embracing it? What species learns not by avoiding wounds but by bleeding? Perhaps they were not evolving. Perhaps they were remembering. We, who had ruled for millennia, felt the weight of time. Against every foe before, time had been our ally. But against the humans, time seemed to be theirs. Each day they grew sharper. Each battle they grew stronger. And for the first time in our empire's reign, we faced not the decline of an enemy, but the rise of one. And in their rise, we saw our own fall. When the last reports reached us of human fleets spreading beyond their system, of colonies rising on shattered moons, of war songs carried across the void, we understood. The awakening was not theirs alone. It was the galaxy's. Every species watching, every civilization whispering, saw what we had tried to hide. That even empires could bleed, and that fragility could become fury. Humanity was no longer a world, no longer a people. They were becoming a storm, and storms cannot be conquered. We had believed our empire eternal. For millennia, our banners had burned across the galaxy, stars bending to our will. Species upon species fell, not with defiance but with whimpers, their resistance shattered beneath the weight of our fleets, our telepaths, our ancient dominion. The void itself seemed to speak our triumph. And then came the humans. At first, they were nothing more than a primitive echo on a blue world. Their cities crude, their fleets an insult to the name of war. We had meant to make of them an example, a lesson to all who might dream of defiance. So we shattered their moon, tore their sky in half, drowned their planet in storms. Yet from that destruction rose not ashes, but fire. The fire spread. We thought their vengeance bound to Terra, but their fleets poured outward like veins of molten metal cracking through stone. They carried their war beyond their system, beyond their grief, into the stars we claimed as ours. Our patrols vanished in the asteroid belts of forgotten colonies. Convoys once secure now fell to ambushes marked by human symbols carved into shattered hulls. Planets under our banner began to whisper songs of rebellion. It was not only humanity's weapons that spread, but their defiance. We had always ruled by inevitability. Our enemies surrendered not merely to our fleets, but to the certainty that resistance was futile. But when the humans rose from catastrophe, when they turned the corpse of their moon into a forge, when they refused to kneel though the sky itself had fallen, the certainty we wielded fractured. Other species watched. And in their watching, something impossible began. Rebellions ignited like sparks. On the slave worlds, where voices had long been silenced, there were whispers. If humans can defy, why not us? Entire sectors seethed with unrest. Chains we thought eternal began to break. Garrisons reported uprisings timed with human incursions, as though humanity's fury resonated across the stars themselves. We once believed rebellion a contagion we could extinguish. But this contagion was no mere revolt. It was an awakening. I recall the council where we first admitted what we had unleashed. Reports poured in, human fleets striking deep into our coreward systems, slave populations turning on their masters, even our own vassals questioning our strength. And amid those reports came the words that chilled us most. Even the stars tremble. For it was not only rebellion, it was something deeper, something that stirred even the void. Our navigators reported anomalies, stellar storms erupting at impossible intervals, gravitational fields flickering as though the galaxy itself recoiled. Superstitious nonsense, we told ourselves. Yet in silence we wondered. Had humanity's defiance touched not only species, but the stars themselves? Their war became more than vengeance. At first they fought for terror, then for survival. But now they fought for every silenced voice, every enslaved world, every empire broken beneath our heel. They became more than human. They became a symbol, and symbols are weapons no fleet can destroy. We struck back, desperate, hurling fleets into their path. Worlds were scoured clean, colonies erased. We sought to smother rebellion with fire. Yet wherever we struck, the humans returned twice as strong. Each loss only fed them. Each scar only sharpened them. Our admirals spoke of impossibility. Our telepaths whispered of minds that no longer broke beneath intrusion but struck back with storms of thought. We were losing not merely a war, but the illusion of dominance itself. We had birthed something we could not contain. I remember the first world that fell not by human fire, but by choice. It was a vassal system on the edge of our dominion. its people long bent beneath our laws. When our fleet arrived to demand their loyalty, we found their banners torn down, not replaced with human emblems, but with their own. And in orbit waited human ships, not as conquerors, but as allies. They had not come to enslave. They had come to awaken. For the first time in our empire's reign, worlds began to choose against us, not out of fear, but out of hope. And that hope was humanity's true weapon. We had thought to erase them. Instead, we had made them eternal. The stars themselves seemed to echo their defiance. Our ancient astronomers, who charted the rhythm of suns, reported anomalies we could not explain. Pulsars shifted their beat as if in resonance with human signals. Nebulae stirred with strange energies where their fleets passed. The void, once silent to us, now seemed to hum with their presence. Were the stars truly trembling, or was it only we, seeing omens in every shadow, our certainty unraveling into fear? We did not know. But we could not deny the truth that hollowed us. Humanity had become more than a people. They had become a storm carried on every voice, every rebellion, every trembling star. And for the first time, we looked upon the future and did not see ourselves in it. We had believed ourselves eternal. Even when the humans rose from ruin, even when rebellions burned across our dominion, still we told ourselves the lie, that the core fleets, the ancient armadas of our empire, would hold. And so we gathered them. 1,000 ships, engines burning brighter than suns, weapons forged from millennia of conquest. The heart of our power, assembled in one strike to end this contagion of defiance once and for all. The void itself shivered beneath our passage. Entire systems dimmed as our fleets moved, shadows cast across worlds. No foe had ever stood against such might. No rebellion had ever endured its coming. We thought humanity would break, as all before them had broken. We were wrong. They came to meet us, but not as conquerors. Their fleets were smaller, their vessels scarred, each one a survivor of storms we ourselves had unleashed. Yet they moved with a precision we could not predict, a unity we could not fracture. Their silence was more terrible than their weapons. No taunts, no broadcasts, only the stillness of a species that had bled too much to waste words. And then we saw it, the weapon. At first, we thought it a debris field, remnants of their shattered moon, drifting aimless through the void. But then the fragments moved, not scattered but aligned. Each shard bore engines, scaffolds, rails of impossible scale. It was not debris at all. It was a weapon, vast beyond imagining, constructed from the corpse of the moon we ourselves had destroyed. They had turned their grief into a blade. We laughed at first. For what was stone against our shields, against our armadas carved from starfire? But then the stones moved, hurled with velocities that defied calculation, each shard a lance of death. The first wave tore through our vanguard, splitting cruisers as if they were paper. The second wave shattered formations, our shields bending and breaking beneath impacts no science could deflect. We tried to maneuver, but their weapons were not fired at random. Each fragment struck with impossible precision, guided not by algorithms, but by human hands that had studied our every move, our every weakness. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Our fleets collapsed. Prideful dreadnoughts, ancient carriers, ships that had once shattered civilizations, all fell. The void blazed with the wreckage of our empire. Our formations broke, commanders screaming across fractured channels. Even our telepaths, once our greatest strength, faltered and wept, unable to endure the storm of human thought that filled the void. Defiance, grief, wrath, hope. They wielded not only weapons of steel, but weapons of will. I watched as our empire burned. Worlds we had held for millennia slipped from our grasp in moments. Our banners fell, torn down not by soldiers, but by the hands of those we had enslaved. And above it all, the humans did not cheer. There was no triumph in their voices, only silence, for they had not fought for conquest. They had fought to survive. We had thought the end would come with thunder, with triumph, with the ecstasy of victory. But the humans taught us a different truth. Victory is heavy. Victory carries weight. Victory does not erase the dead. It carries them forever. Their transmissions, when they came at last, were not of boasting, but of remembrance. Songs heavy with sorrow, oaths spoken not to conquer, but to endure. Across the stars their grief carried louder than our weapons ever had. And in that grief we saw the truth we had long denied. They were not conquerors. They were survivors, and survivors never forget. The galaxy trembled, not with fear of us, but with awe of them. Species that once bowed to our dominion now lifted their heads, not to humanity, but to themselves, inspired by what humanity had become. And we, the architects of destiny, the lords of silence, the empire eternal, became nothing more than ash carried on the winds of history, all because we shattered their moon. We thought we had ended their story. In truth, we had written our own. And in the silence, after the last of our fleets burned, I understood the final lesson. Humanity does not win by conquering. Humanity wins by enduring, and against endurance, even stars may tremble.